For 79 years, the forest hid what happened on that forgotten night. It grew over the wounds of war with slow patience, moss climbing fallen trunks, roots splitting old helmets, fog drifting through branches like pale memories. Birds returned. Time softened everything. Until one morning, a research team stepped into the clearing, and the silence felt different, almost expectant. They were there to search for old wartime remnants. Their equipment swept across the soil with steady, gentle rhythm. Nothing seemed unusual until one device responded with a sudden, sharp, metallic alert. It stopped the team instantly. The lead investigator, Dr. Rourke, knelt and brushed aside the damp leaves. Beneath them was a raised patch of compacted soil, smoother than the rest. They began to clear it, carefully removing the weight of decades from whatever lay beneath. The shape of an arm emerged first, then the curve of a jaw, then the outline of a young man's face. The soil fell away like a curtain being drawn aside, revealing a soldier preserved as though time itself had decided to spare him. His expression was calm, almost meditative. His hands still gripped a rifle across his chest. His uniform, faded, worn, but intact, looked as though it belonged to someone who had fallen only days earlier, not someone lost for almost 80 years. The team stood in stunned silence, but the true revelation came when they expanded the clearing. All around the central body lay other forms, bodies arranged in a wide, imperfect circle. Rusted gear, collapsed helmets, fractured weapons, preserved in the exact positions where they had fallen. 22 enemy combatants, all facing inward, all aimed toward the lone soldier in the center. It was not a grave. It was a battlefield, frozen in time. The researcher closest to the bodies breathed out slowly. This isn't natural. Nothing this exposed should remain like this. Dr. Rourke examined the central figure closely. Under the collar, protected by fabric and soil, she found a metal tag with a single word stamped into it. Ashfall. No rank, no origin, no real name, just a code name. The assistant circled the clearing, mapping the positions. They fell facing him, every one of them. He didn't run, he stayed here. Dr. Rourke's gaze moved around the circle of enemies. He didn't just stay, he fought them. And the spacing tells us something else. He wasn't firing wildly. He placed his shots. He adjusted his position. The crater where Ashfall lay had subtle markings, drag lines where he shifted for angles, compacted patches where he pressed his shoulder or elbows into the mud, tiny depressions showing where he stabilized his weapon for accuracy. The forest had captured every detail of his final stand and refused to let any of it disappear. Nearby, a technician uncovered a small oil-wrapped item inside Ashfall's vest. When Dr. Rourke opened it, she found a slip of paper, weathered but legible, written in tight handwriting. "They will follow me. Wake them, leave no one behind." Signed with the code name, Ashfall. The team stared at the message in silence. It wasn't the note of a man ambushed or cornered. It was the note of someone who understood exactly what was coming. "A diversion," the assistant whispered. He drew them away. Dr. Rourke nodded. He saved his unit by making himself the target. The forest seemed to tighten around them as though acknowledging the truth. This wasn't the story of a soldier caught in battle. It was the story of a soldier who chose his path. The question, heavy as the fog around them, wasn't how he fought 22 enemies alone. It was why he had to. As they continued documenting the scene, each detail led deeper into the same question. Ashfall's posture wasn't the posture of defeat. It was acceptance, someone who made peace with the cost long before the final moment arrived. The team uncovered spent casings, each one aligned toward a different enemy. They found traces of deliberate movement, quick shifts in position, marks where a knee had pressed into soil to stabilize aim. Every sign pointed to a man who fought with clarity, not desperation. The assistant finally murmured, "What kind of soldier does this?" Dr. Rourke answered quietly, "One who understood that survival isn't always the mission." A breeze swept through the clearing, stirring the fog. It rolled gently across Ashfall's preserved face, as if the forest itself were exhaling after decades of holding its breath. No one noticed it first, but they had officially entered the story. Not the history that was written in books, the history buried under leaves and silence. The truth of a soldier whose last act shaped the fate of others. Who was Ashfall? Why was he alone? And what happened in the hours before the forest became his final battlefield? Only the past could answer that, and the past was finally beginning to speak. The forest did not speak in words, yet the team felt a presence in the air, a heaviness that suggested everything they uncovered was only the surface of something deeper. It was impossible not to sense that Ashfall's story began long before this clearing, long before the final moments preserved by the soil. Dr. Rourke stepped back from the crater and looked around, imagining the forest 79 years earlier. Darker, louder, crowded with danger. The clearing had once been a perfect trap. Trees dense enough to hide movement, terrain uneven enough to confuse an untrained scout, but navigable to someone who understood shadow and silence. And Ashfall, whoever he had been, seemed to know it intimately. The assistant examined the tree line. "Look at this," he called softly. "There are impressions in the bark scrapes, old but still visible. Someone climbed here, watched from above." Dr. Rourke approached, tracing her fingers just above the bark. "A vantage point," she said. He studied their approach before engaging. He wasn't overwhelmed. He anticipated everything. They found more signs, faint tracks preserved under layers of debris, small depressions where weight had shifted, a pattern of calculated movement. Ashfall had led his pursuers through the forest deliberately, always one step ahead, always guiding them deeper into a place where he could control the battle. The note they found in his vest echoed through Dr. Rourke's mind. "They will follow me, wake them, leave no one behind." He had written it moments before disappearing into the night. This meant he knew his unit slept nearby. He knew a raiding squad was closing in, and he knew that if he didn't act, they would be wiped out in their sleep. "He made himself bait," Dr. Rourke murmured. The assistant nodded quietly. "Everyone else got to live because he walked away from them." The weight of that truth pressed on the clearing like a second fog. As the team continued their analysis, something unusual about the central area caught their attention. The weapon Ashfall held, rusted yet preserved, was positioned with care, not dropped in panic. His grip, even in death, remained firm. His body wasn't sprawled, it rested in a posture of someone who fought until the final breath. The assistant pointed to his hands. "See that? His fingers, they stayed locked this whole time. No sign of collapse or loosened grip." "It means he didn't fall from fear," Dr. Rourke said. "He fell from exhaustion, from the final push." Slowly, the larger picture began forming in their minds. The raiding squad must have moved through the forest under cover of night, using the fog and darkness to hide their numbers. Ashfall, out on a forward reconnaissance path, must have sensed them long before they reached the camp. He would have recognized their formation, their intention, their pace. He would have known there wasn't time to run back and warn his unit. Instead, he forced them to chase him. An impossible chase, 22 against 1. The path through the forest, where they later found faint impressions, showed Ashfall choosing ground that slowed his pursuers and protected him. Narrow passages between trees, slopes that caused missteps, fallen logs that shielded his movement. He didn't flee blindly, he led them. The assistant ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. "Imagine knowing 22 armed men are behind you, and you still have the clarity to choose the terrain," Dr. Rourke replied. "Imagine knowing your choice is the only thing standing between your unit and annihilation." Her voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. One of the junior researchers, who had remained unusually silent, spoke up. "But what kind of soldier thinks like that? Acts like that?" Dr. Rourke looked again at the codename. "A scout, a sentinel. Someone who lives in the space between danger and safety. Someone trained to disappear if it means the mission succeeds." They continued uncovering the battlefield, now seeing it as a map of Ashfall's mind. In those last hours, the enemy placements were uneven. Some had fallen at distance, some at near range, some with their weapons half lifted, suggesting they were caught mid-step. Ashfall had adjusted continuously. He used his ammunition with terrifying precision. He did not waste a single movement. The assistant crouched beside a fallen enemy nearest the crater. This one was taken down at close range, very close. Ashfall must have already used most of his rounds by the time they reached him. That's when he fought with everything else, Dr. Rourke answered. Terrain, timing, momentum, even the shock of his own resolve. A pause lingered between them. They all understood what that meant. Ashfall didn't fight 22 men. He fought the idea of what would happen if he didn't. And somewhere, years before this clearing, before the final stand, something had shaped that resolve. Something had shaped that resolve long before the forest, long before the night he chose to walk alone. And as the team continued clearing the surrounding soil, they uncovered clues that hinted at who Ashfall had been. Beneath the codename, near the edge of the crater, the assistant found a thin strip of leather partly preserved beneath a layer of compacted earth. It looked like it once belonged to a small journal or field notebook. The pages had long disintegrated, but the leather cover remained firm enough to hold faint impressions, as if someone had pressed writing utensils against it countless times. This was his, the assistant murmured. He kept notes, maybe maps. Dr. Rourke inspected the cover. A scout always does. They carry the terrain with them, even when no one else can see it. The realization settled over them like a quiet truth. Ashfall had lived in places where others only survived. His mind wasn't forged in the moment he chose to divert 22 enemies. His mind had been shaped by countless nights in shadows, hearing danger before it arrived, studying landscapes others walked past blindly. This clearing wasn't an accident, Dr. Rourke said, scanning the terrain. He led them into a place he already knew, a place he had studied. They found more signs, faint etchings on a flat stone partially buried near the roots of an ancient pine. Knot writing, patterns, lines drawn over and over again, perhaps by a bored scout sitting in silence during long hours alone. But the more they examined the lines, the clearer the intention seemed. They mapped ridges, dips in terrain, tree formations, choke points where movement slowed. Ashfall hadn't wandered into this place. He understood it intimately. The assistant stepped back, visibly shaken. He may have mapped this forest himself, or lived in it long enough to make it part of him, Dr. Rourke replied. The team worked in thoughtful silence until a startled voice broke the stillness. I found something else. They gathered around as one of the junior researchers uncovered a small metal clasp tangled in fragile fabric. It wasn't military gear. It was personal, a charm or keepsake worn around the neck. The symbol was simple, a curved line crossed by another, almost like a horizon marked by a falling ember. Dr. Rourke studied it. This symbol, it resembles his code name, a line of fire descending, Ashfall. So the name meant something to him, the assistant said. It wasn't assigned, it was chosen. That changed everything. Soldiers didn't choose code names lightly, and when they did, the meaning was always personal, rooted in memory, in trauma, or in a promise made long before the mission. What kind of person names himself after ashes? A researcher whispered. One who knows loss intimately, Dr. Rourke said, or one who survived it. The forest seemed to lean in with that answer. As they continued clearing debris, they found another hint. A folded piece of fabric tucked near Ashfall's vest seam, not part of his uniform. It was a small handkerchief, frayed around the edges, embroidered with a simple pattern, 3 vertical lines descending like falling sparks. Another echo of Ashfall. This wasn't decoration, it was memory. Something or someone had shaped that code name, etched it into his identity long before this final battle. The investigators exchanged glances, realizing they weren't just uncovering evidence of tactical brilliance, they were uncovering fragments of a human life quietly carried into war. Dr. Rourke stood and looked again at the circle of fallen enemies. People don't become this kind of soldier by accident, she said. Something taught him to endure. Something taught him to carry pain without letting it break him. The assistant asked softly, "Do you think he fought for someone?" "Everyone who walks into danger willingly is fighting for someone," she replied, "whether that person is living or only a memory." A breeze moved through the clearing, thin but deliberate, as if the forest itself acknowledged the truth. The researchers widened their perimeter to search for any remnants that might lead deeper into Ashfall's past. They found evidence of older campfires long extinguished, stone rings hidden beneath soil layers, places where someone had once sat alone at night watching the horizon. They found a carved line on a tree trunk, faint but deliberate, resembling the same falling ember symbol from the charm he had moved through this forest, not as a stranger, but as someone who had walked its paths many times before. This ground was more than a battleground. It was a refuge, a memory, a place he returned to. The assistant looked around quietly. Maybe this forest wasn't just his final stand. Maybe it was his beginning. Dr. Rourke nodded, and his end brought him full circle. The clearing grew quieter at those words, as if the forest itself understood the truth more clearly than any of them. The mist drifted low, settling around the crater where Ashfall lay, curling around the rusted weapons and fallen forms that surrounded him like a frozen chorus of shadows. Dr. Rourke stepped away from the bodies and let her eyes travel along the tree line. The aged trunks stood like silent guards, their bark scarred by storms, their branches arching together in a cathedral of memory. If Ashfall had spent time here before the war swallowed him, the forest would have known him long before it preserved his final breath. "We need to consider something," Dr. Rourke said softly. "What if he didn't just learn this forest? What if he belonged to it?" The assistant frowned. "Belonged how?" "Some people grow up hiding in places like this," she replied. "Some learn early that danger moves quietly, and some learn to move even quieter." The team exchanged looks, each considering the same unspoken thought. This wasn't just the battlefield of a brave man. It might have been the sanctuary of a boy who survived things long before bullets and uniforms. They moved further outward, expanding the excavation perimeter. Under layers of leaves, they discovered a shallow indentation in the ground, too deliberate to be natural. The assistant brushed away debris and uncovered the remnants of an old shelter, pieces of rotted wood arranged into a familiar shape, remnants of branches stripped clean, stones placed in a pattern that formed a crude wall. "A hideout," he said quietly. "Someone lived here or hid here." Dr. Rourke knelt beside it. "Not recently. This is decades older than the battle. Soil layers confirm it." The realization struck them with chilling clarity. Ashfall had known this forest because he had once taken refuge in it. The assistant's voice lowered. "So before he was a soldier, he was someone who learned to survive alone." Another researcher pointed out faint scorch marks on the interior stones, signs of tiny, carefully shielded fires. Not the roaring heat of a camp, but the kind a frightened child might build for warmth without wanting to be found. Dr. Rourke traced the stones gently. "He must have come here when he was very young," she murmured, "long before he had a rifle in his hands." Pieces of Ashfall's life were starting to surface, the silent vantage points carved into bark, the careful sketches etched into stone, the carved symbol that matched his code name, the handkerchief embroidered by someone who cared. This forest had shaped him long before war had claimed him. The assistant stared at the old shelter. He grew up with silence, with shadows, with danger. He exhaled slowly. No wonder he reached adulthood with instincts sharper than most soldiers ever develop. Dr. Rourke nodded. This place taught him how to disappear, how to observe, how to understand what others missed. It built the foundation of who he became. "And then the war built the rest," the assistant added. "Not the war," she said. "The mission he chose, or the mission that forced itself onto him." The forest's breathless quiet seemed to wrap around them again, encouraging their search deeper into forgotten corners. They found more faint carvings, small symbols repeated over the years, marking time the way someone stranded might count days. Some were grouped, others solitary, and some crossed out with violent strokes, as if the person who made them had changed. "They tell a story," Dr. Rourke whispered, "of someone waiting, someone returning." The assistant touched one of the carvings gently. So this place brought him strength once, and in the end, it demanded everything. Dr. Rourke looked toward the crater again. Ashfall's face, calm and resolute even in death, seemed to echo the sentiment he had not simply chosen the forest as his battleground. He had chosen it because it was where he understood himself best, where he had been shaped by silence, taught by danger, and forged into someone who could stand alone against overwhelming odds. "He didn't fight here because he had no choice," she said softly. He fought here because he knew how, and because he knew why, the assistant added. Those reasons, the memories buried deeper than the bodies, the losses that shaped his codename, the promises hidden in that final message, were still waiting beneath layers the team had not yet uncovered. They stood on the threshold of understanding, but the heart of Ashfall's story lay just beyond reach. A soldier doesn't become a legend in a single night. He becomes a legend in the countless moments no one sees. And somewhere in those unseen years, within this forest, within those hidden shelters, within the life of a child who learned to endure, Ashfall found the fire that would one day lead him to sacrifice everything for those still sleeping behind him. That fire, born in solitude, sharpened by hardship, carried in silence, never left him. It shaped every instinct, every decision, every step he took through the world. And on the night the raiding squad advanced toward the unsuspecting soldiers sleeping miles behind him, that fire became the reason those men would wake up to another dawn. The researchers, standing in the quiet clearing nearly 8 decades later, finally understood. Ashfall didn't choose the forest for his last stand. The forest chose him. It had been his refuge, his teacher, and his proving ground long before he ever carried a weapon into war. In many ways, his final act was a return home. O'Rourke walked back toward the crater where Ashfall still lay protected by the soil that had held him for so long. She studied the arrangement once more, the 22 fallen enemies encircling him, the precision in their spacing, the deliberate positioning of his body. None of it resembled a desperate clash. All of it resembled a man who fought with purpose. He wasn't just stopping them, she said quietly. He was fulfilling something he believed in, something personal. The assistant nodded. It wasn't duty alone, it was conviction. They both stared at the preserved expression on Ashfall's face. There was no fear in it, no panic. It held something else entirely, a quiet acceptance, a knowing resolve, the peace of someone who had made his decision long before the first shot was ever fired. The small message found in his vest echoed that truth. They will follow me. Wake them. Leave no one behind. The team understood it now. The soldiers sleeping behind him weren't just comrades. They were the continuation of something he refused to let die. Ashfall had lived a life shaped by loss, trained by solitude, strengthened by surviving the kind of pain that forces a person to choose who they will become. And he chose to become someone who protected others at any cost. The forest's silence deepened as if acknowledging the conclusion. When they finally lifted Ashfall's body from the soil, they did so with reverence. The young soldier, who had fought alone in the dark, who had carried the weight of his past into one final stand, had been given back to history. His codename, once whispered in secret, now carried a different meaning. Ashfall was no longer just a scout or a lost soldier. He was a symbol of endurance, of sacrifice, of the quiet power one person can possess when shaped by hardship and guided by purpose. The rusted weapons surrounding him were collected carefully, each one a silent witness to the impossible battle he had fought. The bodies of the enemies were documented and preserved, not out of sympathy, but because their positions completed the truth of what happened. Their presence told the story as clearly as any written record. Dr. Rourke looked at the clearing one final time before the team prepared to leave. The fog drifted between the trees, soft and pale, wrapping around the place like a final protective veil. She felt a heaviness in her chest, a mix of respect, sorrow, and awe. This forest kept his story safe for almost 80 years, she said. It didn't let time erase him. The assistant lowered his head, maybe because he never tried to erase it. They stood together in the quiet that followed, knowing this moment, this discovery, would change how history remembered the forgotten soldiers who fought in shadows. Ashfall's story would never fit neatly into official records, but it didn't need to. Stories like his lived not through documents, but through the hearts of those who heard them. As the team packed up their equipment and began the long walk back through the trees, the forest returned to its stillness, but it no longer felt empty. It felt complete. The past, once buried beneath silence and soil, had finally spoken. And somewhere in that stillness, Ashfall's final act echoed, proof that one person, shaped by hardship and bound by purpose, can alter the fate of many without ever seeking recognition. The world would never know his real name, but it would remember his choice. Before this story ends, there is a question only you can answer, because every person hears Ashfall's story differently. What do you believe truly drove Ashfall into the darkness that night? Was it courage, guilt, loyalty, destiny, or something else entirely? Let us know in the comments. Your answer might reveal the part of the story that resonates most deeply with you. And if stories like this move you, if you want more cinematic mysteries, hidden legends, and human truths brought to light, subscribe to Mindfront, where forgotten heroes rise again, and their stories finally find the voices they deserve.